All right, well, Halitics, I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is Wednesday. I don't know, what is it? The 21st of January. I'm getting a late start today. Do apologize. Dolly the doggy taking up a lot of my time. She's keeping me on my toes. Got to take her out a lot, play with her, and it does make it a little bit more difficult for me to get my ducks in a row for the podcast. So that's why I'm a little later than usual. I do apologize again. All right. Don't forget, I haven't always been promoting this. Please do subscribe. Let's get up to that 500 number. Really, really, really want to get there. I think, and I've noticed some of my later recent videos haven't gotten such big numbers. And I think perhaps it's the thumbnail. Perhaps it's that YouTube is just not sharing them. I just don't really get it. But that may be the reason. Yesterday's thumbnail got some criticism, and I decided after further reflection that it was a legit critique of what I had posted in the thumbnail. It was an image of Trump and talking about Greenland, and there was a comment that was a little misleading. I thought it was fair, but I decided that I was going to pull back on it. Because I often criticize the media, right? I said that the media shouldn't have said, what did I went on and on. Trump had allegedly, threatened to cancel, right? That's what the media said. Trump threatens to cancel the 2026 midterms. And I said, that's not what he said. The actual quote, he doesn't say that. And I thought, what I attributed to Trump about his statement regarding Greenland was fair. He was threatening. He was clearly rattling sabers, if not a direct threat of war over Greenland. But I decided, it's a little bit more further than I'm going to go. So thank you for the criticism. I went along with what you had to say, commenter on Halitics. All that said, we're going to try to be a little bit funny here. Today's program, we're going to focus more. I think I probably spend even more time bashing Democrats than Trump and the Republicans. I don't know. I'm sure both sides think I bash them more, right? So if you're a Trump supporter, if you're MAGA, you probably think, what are you talking about? You're a Democrat. I hear that all the time. You're a Democrat. You supported Biden. No, I didn't. You support Harris. You support Harris. No, I didn't. I actually did vote for Biden, to be fair. I don't know if that means I supported him. I was a very strong critic of his, especially after he became a fomenter of war with Russia. But there were many other areas where I felt Biden was way, way, way off base. So I think, you always hear, people hear what they want to hear, and they hear criticism of Trump, they think I'm a Democrat. You hear criticism of the Democrats, you think I'm a Trumpanzee. I've heard that expression. No, I care about America. I want our country to be a better place. I think both parties have made it a worse place. I don't even think it's really hard to prove that case. It seems very, very obvious. All right, 240 again. Please, love to talk to you. 240-242-5646. That's what we're here for, to have that debate, have that conversation. I thought this was pretty funny. I saw this kind of humorous video posted, and that is actually, I believe, a screen capture from the real Donald Trump on Truth Social there, where he's planting that flag. We're trying to be a little bit funny here every now and then. Planting that flag, the U.S. flag in Greenland. I guess he's got behind him J.D. Vance and little Marco, who by the perspective and also by reality is a little smaller than Trump. And I guess Vance, who's also standing at a lower elevation. But, this is the kind of, rhetoric, if you want to use it, jingoism, that, it's embarrassing, really. But this also gives rise to my saying, hey, Trump's threatening some kind of war over Greenland. And he kind of was, right? I mean, he said, people said to him, how far are you going to go? You'll find out. Today, he tamped down the war talk a little bit, but he did post this at Truth Social. And I thought the video that obviously some troll put up was very, very funny. So let's play it for you. I mean, they're attacked by the polar bears. They're dragged off. And then I love the polar bear that flexes and smiles for the camera. That's the best part. Let's play that again because I want to freeze the polar bear. But that's the funniest part right there when the polar bear flexes for the camera right there. It's pretty hilarious, right? So like he's taking his touchdown, scored his touchdown, smiling for the camera. Well done. Whoever posted that, I had a name, but unfortunately I lost it. But if you have the name, let me know. 240-242-5646 post. I'll try to see if I can see comments as well in the live chat there. 240-242-5646. That's why we do this. Get the comments, have the back and forth. A little bit, I guess it's better news from Davos. Trump's plane apparently took off last night for Davos, Air Force One, and then had to come back to wherever their home base was because there were some electrical issues, but whatever they were resolved. Trump rules out taking Greenland by force, but calls for immediate negotiations. See, to me, that's not really ruling it out. He's saying, yeah, we're not going to go to war, but it's really a good idea. You should give us Greenland. And he steps up demand to annex Greenland, but rules out using force. Apparently, that was enough to calm roiling markets, which were concerned about a war with Europe. I'm not clear why they would be concerned. Every war has seemed to be extraordinarily profitable for Wall Street, but maybe they thought really this could mean and likely would mean the ruin of the world. And the U.S. EU trade partnership has been very profitable, I think, for both American and European-based companies, so they don't want to see that put in jeopardy. Trump again, totally embarrassing himself. And you could make the argument, I think I would make it, embarrassing the United States as well. He's our representative, just gets everything wrong, the blusteriness, the sort of the transparency of his motives, his personal way he takes everything. It's really humiliating for us. And you could say, well, it's really not. It's just Trump, and every country is entitled to make a bad choice now and again, which I suppose is true. But we chose, in quotes, Trump because we don't have good choices, because we make terrible mistakes in primaries. And in 24, we didn't even have a primary. There was no primary, right? Well, there was. You could have voted for Jill Stein. That's all I can say. Not in the primary, obviously, not in the Democratic primary. The choices were very bad. Was Eric Swalwell a terrible choice? I think Marianne Williamson would have been probably less bad than Harris, but she's a clown. She really is. She's not capable of. I don't believe running a country. I agree with Norm Finkelstein on Williamson. Just, her continuing to flack for the Democratic Party is so embarrassing for her. Here's Trump on wind energy. We're facing ecocide. We're facing climate holocaust because we keep burning fossil fuels. And Trump, for whatever reason, really hates wind energy. One thing I've noticed is that the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses, and the worse that country is doing. I don't know what possible reason he would have for that. There's a book about Amsterdam, I think in the 18th century, how Amsterdam and the Netherlands were the richest country in the world for at least a period of time before England surpassed the Low Country there, Netherlands. And of course, built on wind power, Netherlands. So one of the wealthiest countries for a long, long time. The Netherlands, very heavily dependent on wind energy. Obviously, Trump has zero historical knowledge, or only to the extent it serves his purposes. The history is supportive of his views. So he goes after China, says they don't actually generate wind energy. They just make the the turbines and the blades. And the Guardian, to its credit, just flat out debunks Trump's idiocy there. Is it idiocy, or it's playing to his base? Because his base is never going to care. That's what's also, and I don't want to be too hard on the base. I really, really never want to go after voters, and it's not completely true. But Democrats have to give them, it's not completely true that the base will never turn on Trump. They have to a degree. We saw it with TPUSA on the support for, the unquestioned support for Israel clearly has some conservatives up in arms, some MAGA supporters up in arms. But in general, they're very forgiving of Trump. And I think it's because they hate libs, they hate Democrats so much. They feel that they've been sold a bill of goods over and over and over again. And, let's face it, we all have different temperaments, different personalities. Some people just aren't really prepared to extend the empathy towards people who, especially people who are different than they are, who look differently. They tend to fear those people. We all have that in us, some more than others. To a degree, that is part of the reason some people become conservatives. The way you win their votes, and you shouldn't rule them out as voters. There are people who are xenophobic, but they love their families. They're good to their kids. They should never be ruled out as people. The way you win their votes is you support, you enunciate, you propose, and you enforce, when you have power, policies that will improve the quality of their life. Just as they should improve the quality of everyone's life, except for those, obviously, whose lives are too good as it is. So Trump saying China has, doesn't use windmills. And then the Guardian points out they have more wind capacity than any other country in the world. So they actually do generate quite a bit of energy from wind, and twice as much capacity under construction than the rest of the world combined. China's wind generation 24 equaled 40% of global wind generation. So it's absurd what Trump said. He just complete, I don't know if you call it a fabrication, ignorance, but because he hates wind energy and because he's in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry, he's going to demonize clean, green energy. He's also, a complete denier of the climate holocaust, for which he's significantly responsible. And I say significantly, look, he was the president from 2017 to 2021 when we extracted more petroleum than we had during any previous presidential term. Of course, that record broken by Joe Biden, and then Trump pushing more fossil fuels, more drilling, more extraction than ever. Very, very, very bad. Very, very bad. Here's Gavin Newsom, right? 2028 presidential candidate. Gavin Newsom, by the way, featured in today's thumbnail, and in a critical way, he's opposing a 5% wealth tax on billionaires in California, which is a great idea, should pass. Those of you who have listened to my program before know that I'm not as big a fan of wealth taxes as I am on very high estate taxes. I think that would be a better way to go, along with very high top marginal income tax rates. I think the estate tax is a gift that keeps on giving because rich people die every year. But if you have a one-time wealth tax, then obviously you're not collecting it every time somebody dies. It's not quite as, can't be used, and it's not an ongoing fix for the budget. And also, the estate tax doesn't just tax billionaires, it would also tax centimillionaires and 25 millionaires, where you want to set that threshold. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, described Trump's speech at Davos, where he went after, he tilted at windmills, is what he did. Newsom described Trump's speech as one of the most insignificant hours I've spent in years, and it's fair for him to say that because Trump was only supposed to speak for 45 minutes. He just rambled on and on, probably well over an hour. And Newsom specifically said it was insignificant, and its insignificance. He said, well, we all knew that he's not going to invade Greenland. Or I don't think everyone knew that. There was a legit fear that he would invade Greenland. We saw military exercises. I believe Denmark may have sent some troops there. France and Germany, or at least France, definitely committed to defending from Trump, to defending Greenland from Trump. So I don't know why Newsom was so convinced. See, I think that's where you really go off, where you do the taco, Trump always chickens out, is a very, very big mistake. I think what you should say is, we're glad that, Trump made the decision not to invade Greenland, and say it with a straight face. That would be a better way to respond. Yeah, he made the right call there. We're glad he did. Goes on to say Trump is both boring and at times boorish. But this is where Newsom contradicts himself. Europe should be worried, he said, if they don't respond firmly with conviction. And of course, he's right. That's the fear. You can't appease. This is what I said yesterday on Halitics. You cannot appease Trump. We know what happens when you appease tyrants. And appease isn't negotiating. Appeasement isn't discussions. Appeasement is when you give them what they want. When you don't demand concessions from them. When you allow their bullying and threats to succeed, to get them what they want. That's what appeasement is. It is not negotiating. People say, well, you can't appease Putin by giving him Ukraine. Well, I don't think we should ever have given, and we did not, Ukraine to Putin. And there were much, much better ways to prevent Putin from actually taking over Ukraine, which he seemingly has done at this point. But obviously, you don't give tyrants like Trump, like Putin, what they want. You have to force them to negotiate, and you have to force them to give you what you want in return, and make sure whatever they get isn't going to strengthen their hand down the road. We see the fruits of appeasement, obviously, in this image here. When there was appeasement, when basically Hitler got everything he wanted and nobody else got what they want. 240-242-5646. So I don't really get where Newsom makes the point. He said, well, first he says, yeah, we all knew what he was, Trump said what we all knew he would say, which is there's not going to be an invasion of Greenland. But then he says, Newsom does, Europe should be worried if they don't stand up to Trump. Yeah, because he'll take what he wants, and that could include taking Greenland. He noted that the strong statements by European leaders, particularly Macron, and I quoted Emmanuel Macron yesterday, where he said, hey, Europe is not going to put up with this. We're not going to just let Trump threaten our economy with these tariffs. We have a way to respond, and we will respond. And you don't just get unfettered access, said Macron, to European markets. The largest unified market in the world is not available to you without any costs if you're going to start jacking up your tariffs. So Newsom doffing his cap to Macron there, but also noting what happened yesterday. Trump responded to, and multiple things happened yesterday. It was not just Macron and the EU president's speech and Carney's speech, but the markets react. And I think Newsom's right there. Yeah, the stock market dropped significantly, and Trump obviously is very, very responsive to the market. He believed, and I think with reason, that his warmongering, his saber rattling caused the stock markets to drop. Thought, man, maybe this isn't the best thing to do. Maybe I'm not going to do this. Could cost me a lot of money. Could cost my donors, my funders, my supporters, my friends, to the extent I have any, a lot of money. So therefore, maybe I'm not going to talk so much about taking Greenland by force. But that doesn't mean I don't want it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to try to get it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to demand it. Gavin Newsom wants to be president, clearly. He made some, I think, astute analytical points with respect to what Trump has been doing. I think Gavin Newsom clearly has the temperament to be a much, much better president than Trump. But he has also the ties to the billionaire class. I don't believe he is a billionaire, but he's a very, very wealthy man. He has many allies among the Silicon Valley billionaires, and he is not going to take them on. And the latest example of this is this California Billionaire Tax Act, which is being proposed by labor unions. It's a 5% levy on assets over $1 billion that are held by one individual or nuclear family, right? Like the spouses. And there would be 5%, but there's a lot of carve outs. So if it's a family owned business and it's not public, the stock isn't publicly traded, then there may be some limits as to, how much of that is subject to the levy. Personal property, real estate is not included. And some of these California estates are $100 million. So that would not be taxed, right? So 5% of $100 million is $5 million. That's not going to be taxed. It's basically on your liquid assets. It's on your stock holdings. That's what 5% tax is on. And it seems to be perfectly appropriate. It seems to be just what the doctor ordered. Now, it's not, I shouldn't say just what, because this doctor would order an estate tax, which I was quite surprised to learn California doesn't have an estate tax, doesn't have an inheritance tax. An inheritance tax is what heirs would pay. Usually you have one or the other, but not both. In this case, California doesn't. And they should. They absolutely should have an estate tax. New York State has an estate tax of 16%. That's a pretty significant tax. If you have a state over about 6 million, and they by the way, that tax kicks in at a lower rate, at a lower threshold than federal. Federal's, I think, around 10, 12, 13. Congress kept raising it. Right? It's 13 million now. The Republicans made that permanent. 13 million is an awfully large estate. Now it seems like nothing compared to like 200 billion people like Larry Ellison and Musk have, but still, that's a lot of money. And so the vast majority, if your estate is 20 million, the vast majority of that isn't even taxed under the federal estate tax. And in California, there's no California estate tax. In New York, you'd pay 16% after the first 5-6 million, something like that. I'm not sure where that cuts in. And actually, it's all subject to the New York state tax. Once you get above a certain threshold, there's no exempt amount. If you get above the minimum, if you have a certain amount in your estate above the minimum, the entire estate is subject to that New York state tax. So if you have a $20 million estate, 16%, you pay $3.2 million, your estate pays $3.2 million in taxes. The first $5 million isn't taken out of that, right? Because normally when you have these thresholds, let's say the threshold were $5 million, you wouldn't pay any estate tax on that $5 million. You'd only pay the 3.2% or 16% or whatever it is on the what's above that in your estate, 15 million. But in New York, they don't do that. They just say everything is subject to the estate tax if you're above the threshold. So that's a really, really, really big difference in the tax laws between California and New York State. A billionaire, the estate of a billionaire will pay the 40% in federal taxes, which would come to around, if somebody dies with $1 billion estate, the estate tax on that would be in California a little under $400 million, a little under $400 million on that billion. Now that's what's subject to you could have all sorts of ways to try to shelter assets, but it's not that easy to do. In any event, that first $1 billion about a little less than 400 million would be subject to the estate tax, period, in California. In New York, you'd pay 16% on the billion, 160 million, and then another 400 or so million. So therefore, you're paying well over $100 million more on, well over 10% more to New York State if you're a billionaire who dies in New York State versus if you're that same billionaire who dies, if you die and live in New York State versus the same billionaire who dies and lived in California. They should have an estate tax in California. That is what the law should be, and it should be graduated. It should get higher and higher. If you're not going to have an estate tax, then at least have a statewide ballot initiative to enact an emergency tax on billionaires to save California's healthcare system from collapse. And this is what unions want, and they're absolutely right about it. This is what is needed for the state in this moment. It seems clear that this is what Democrats should support. The Attorney General for the state has cleared the way for signature gathering. It will be on the ballot in November, and I really hope it passes. The problem is that California Dems are opposing it. And I just want to show you a few of the people who do support this tax. And I know there's like all these arguments, well, where it's not constitutional. As I understand it, it probably is constitutional. This Supreme Court, I could easily see saying, no, it's not, saying that you can't just tax wealth. There's nothing in the Constitution. But of course, states have an awful lot of power. The federal government might not be able to impose such a tax without some kind of constitutional amendment. And this bill, by the way, that California, this ballot measure, would in fact amend the California state constitution to authorize it in a couple of ways, make it different. I'm kind of convinced. I read an analysis by Berkeley professors that suggests that this probably would not run afoul of the Constitution. That said, obviously with Alito, Thomas, and some of the other right-wingers on that bench, you've got a problem. But what are they? Coney Barrett, Alito, Thomas, Roberts, and Kavanaugh. Is that 6? That's 5. I don't know. There's one more conservative I think I'm missing. It's close. It's close what they would do. But I think there's a real shot it would survive. And it would be great if it did, because then other states could also weigh some type of wealth tax. Again, I think the best wealth tax is an estate tax. So I'm not saying this is better than that. I don't know why this. I frankly don't even know why California isn't considering an estate tax. But you're getting this on the ballot. People clearly would benefit from it. Go for it. Again, I want to show you the people who do support it. The groups. You have Save California Healthcare and Public Education, SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, other SEIU United. So basically healthcare workers, unions, and apparently public education people as well. Ro Khanna is a big supporter of this legislation. And I want to play a clip that I think is what every Democrat should have on their iPhone or Android or whatever they use, because this is the argument that is the most impactful, most effective against Trump. You know, Gavin Newsom can talk all he wants about how Trump, is boring and Trump is boorish, and he's right. But the American people are not going to turn to the Democrats to lead them unless Democrats promote policies, unless they support policies that American people recognize will benefit them or in their interests, and take on the people who have hurt them, who have done so much damage, like the billionaires, especially the billionaires. Here's Ro Khanna.
Mr. Speaker, our country is at a moral crossroads. Just today, it comes out that billionaires are worth $8 trillion, more than 50% of Americans combined. And what does the president do? He decides he doesn't have the money for the American people. He's going to starve the American people to give $40 billion to the corrupt libertarian leader in Argentina.
Right, so very good the way Ro Khanna did that. Talks about how much money the richest Americans have, and at the same time saying, hey, Trump is going to give taxpayer money to Milei in Argentina, who's corrupt, whose country is actually collapsing, was collapsing in that moment because of very poor leadership and corruption by Argentina, by Milei. And Trump's not only not willing to raise taxes on the billionaires, he's cutting their taxes, slashing their taxes, and he's taking money from hardworking Americans and sending it to Argentina. So very, very smart the way Khanna frames that.
Dollars would have fed the American people. How is that America first? And then he says, I don't care about the cab driver who's paying $2,600 now per month in health insurance as opposed to $44 because I don't want to save the 20 million Americans who are going to face high premium increases. How is that America first? We need national health insurance in this country. We need to tax billionaires in this country. We need to fund SNAP in this country, and we need to stop funding Argentina and corrupt foreign leaders.
So this is the kind of argument that has to be made over and over and over by Democrats. And they just won't do it. They just aren't prepared. You have, here and there, you have a Ro Khanna. And I have my issues with Khanna, right? Khanna's not a perfect spokesperson for this. He made a lot of money in the market, apparently some insider trading, it would seem clear. A lot of, juggling, a lot of churning accounts. And you don't do that unless you know your stocks are probably going to go up. So you buy the stock the day before it goes up and you sell it the next day because you don't want to risk, some bad news coming down the line. You got your extraordinary profit. Otherwise, you should never trade in that fashion. So Khan is not perfect by any means, but that soak the rich argument, you got to just keep making it over and over, and every Democrat has to speak it. Every Democrat has to say it. Current Affairs covering this story is saying this is one of the most popular positions Democrats can take, is to take on the billionaire class and demand, say that you elect us, we're going to raise taxes on the rich. This is an issue that cuts across party lines. Most Americans get that the rich pay far too little in taxes, and that puts a huge burden on everybody else. This is really easy. And the economy would obviously benefit as well. I say obviously because our economy did best with much higher top marginal tax rates. I just don't I do get it. Democrats are either like Newsom, very wealthy, or they want to be wealthy, or they want to collect from wealthy donors. But all of those are factors in their unwillingness as a party to stand with the American people. It's truly devastating, really. It's why our country is starting to become a failed state. If we cannot address the challenges we face, if we don't figure out ways to raise revenues and cut the worst kinds of expenses, militarism and the like, we're done. So just, real quick, getting back to that thumbnail. So there's Khanna. Let's tax California billionaires so everybody has health care. Newsom, come on, man. We're all elites here, meaning, hey, I'm a multimillionaire, probably worth 50 million, 100 million, whatever it is. Khanna, you're super rich too. Why would you want to do this? And Katie Porter says, or wannabe, right? Because she's not that wealthy. I was looking her up. But she's against it. She's against it. Wow. Now, what do you do with this? You just say, throw up your hands and say, it sucks. It sucks. And there is an answer, and the answer is named Butch Ware in California. Here's Gavin Newsom. I don't know if he says this. He says his concern. I'm going to play this clip. I don't have all of it, I don't think, but there's a real there's a claim that this could cause an exodus, right, of billionaires from California. They're all going to leave.
California already heavily relies on its top earners for a bulk of the cash that provides key state services. So some state leaders like Governor Gavin Newsom are worried that even just losing a few of these people could mean a huge hit to the state's bottom line. As this debate intensifies, the governor is doubling down on his fight.
It's a badly drafted effort. It's already had an outsized impact on this state.
A new billionaire tax in California, still a non-starter for Governor Gavin Newsom. He made this clear at a press conference in San Francisco Friday.
It does not support our public educators, does not support our teachers and counselors, our librarians. It doesn't support our first responders and firefighters. It doesn't support the general fund.
Billionaires.
So it actually absolutely does. What he said isn't true. The ballot measure provides for the money to be used to pay for health care, which is ever more expensive, taking up a larger and larger share of California's budget. With the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid by Trump, California will have to make up that difference. Obviously, that will come from the general fund, which you just said it doesn't help. Obviously, it helps if you raise all this money and you put it into healthcare. You don't have to spend money from the general fund for those other expenses. We already see teachers supporting this. So he's just full of it. He's just full of crap. And we've seen this before from Newsom where, you can only go so far. He opposed allowing fast food workers to unionize. I believe I want to look that up. I'm pretty sure did Newsom opposed bill to allow fast food workers to unionize. This is, he is a centrist. Says he didn't oppose that. Okay, he did not oppose the bill. It was more of a compromise. He gave them some organizing rights, but not full power. There were some other areas where I think he was more anti-labor. Certainly, he has never been for, say, Medicare for all. You get what you get with Newsom. This is a really, really bad get. According to Politico, the billionaire tax sparks. Well, actually, before we get to that, I just want to respond to the point that he made, or that the news media made, that this could drive billionaires from California. It just won't do that. I mean, really, you live in Beverly Hills. You live up there on Pacific Avenue at Billionaires Row in San Francisco. Where are you going to go that has that beauty, that has that, all the, wonderful amenities that, and I'm not saying the Golden State has been lost a lot of its, luster. There's tarnish for sure on the gold. But hey, if you're at the top of the tree, man, where else would you want to be? The sunshine, the breezes from the coast. We're not talking about people who are living in the inland empire. We're not talking about people who are getting 120 degrees in the summer and minus 20 in the winter, like in Redding. That's not where these billionaires are living. They're living in the most ideal places you could possibly live. They're not going anywhere. And even if they were like, well, yeah, I'm worth $100 billion, maybe I'll have to pay $5 billion. It's nothing. It means where are you going to move to? California hasn't got an estate tax or inheritance tax. So your heirs, which I presume is the only thing you really care about at this point, because you have so much, you'd have to find some place which doesn't have that estate tax or that inheritance tax. If you want them to have more, then you're going to leave them. And the places that I think people might look at and say, well, that's pretty appealing. If I can't live in California, then, there's some other places that are pretty nice. Let's look at where there are estate taxes besides, which there aren't in California, right? We just said if you die in New York State with $1 billion, you're going to be winding up paying over $100 million more. Your heirs are going to wind up with $100 million less than they would have if you were a resident of California when you die, because of that New York State estate tax. Now, I could be completely wrong about this, but I used to live in both states, New York and California, and there's a lot of overlap. And a lot of those movie stars and the tech bros, they got places in both. They got house in Southern California. They got a house in Silicon Valley, in Atherton, or wherever. They got a house in the Hamptons. That's where they live. They live in California and New York, maybe Europe. They're not living in Oklahoma. They're not living in Arkansas, where there's no estate tax. There's no inheritance tax. There's none of that. So I think you can see this little chart here that shows where you would pay, and California's not on it. So Connecticut, it's a pretty desirable state. Greenwich, a lot of people, you're outside New York City, it's beautiful. Westport, a lot of very wealthy people living there. You want to live with them, you want to rub elbows with them, get out of California. You're not going to go to Connecticut if you want to avoid taxes. You're going to pay 12% estate tax. That means you're going to pay a hell of a lot more. Your estate it's going to come out of your heir's pocket, and everybody's going to be subject to that when they die, if they're in that. And it doesn't mean you got to have a billion, just 14 million in Connecticut. Hawaii, beautiful place. A lot of Californians go to Hawaii, right? You're going to move there. You got an estate tax exemption under 6 million, 10 to 20%, much higher than that 5%. Illinois, Chicago's a nice city. Some people do move there. $4 million estate tax exemption. So all of these states have estate taxes that will result ultimately in the billionaire leaving far less to the heirs than they would, even if they stayed in California and had to pay that 5% on what they have over $1 billion. That 5% wealth tax is penny ante compared to what you'd pay in some of these other desirable states. New Jersey, New York. What about the West Coast? We already talked about New York. There it is, 7.16 is the estate tax exemption. But once you get above that, your entire estate is subject to it. You're at $1 billion, your estate has $1 billion in it, you're going to pay $160 million. Compare that to you don't even pay at $1 billion, you're not paying anything in California. Let's say you have $2 billion. So you pay 5%, $100 million. In New York, your estate would have paid $320 million. Big difference. 3.2% more. I did that in my math right. I did. 3.2% more if no, 320%, 420. I don't know how that works. 3.2 times more is your estate's obligation than if you die as a resident of New York than if you live as a resident in California. Other states, Oregon. You like the West Coast, right? That's why you live in California. You like the ocean. You like the water. Don't move to Oregon or Washington State because you're going to be paying a hell of a lot higher. Your state's going to pay a hell of a lot higher than you'll have to pay by virtue of that wealth tax. The whole idea people are going to move out of the state is just not legit. It's just bogus. It's make weight argument. It's like the people say, well, you're going to move out of You're going to move out of New York City because you don't want to pay the Mom Donnie's millionaire's tax or whatever it is. It just doesn't ring true. All right, 240-242-5646. It's just an argument. You know, when I was a lawyer, I guess I still am a lawyer. You make any argument you think might stick, might work. You don't say to yourself, well, gee, this isn't a really good argument. Now, sometimes you don't because it may make you look stupid, right? If you make an argument that's just so clearly not, it's clearly been debunked, right? You had witnesses that your own witness said something wasn't true. Probably aren't going to want to spend a lot of time on it. But hey, who knows? Maybe there will be one billionaire who's so mad about that 5% wealth tax that they're going to move out of California. Okay. So there is an argument. It's a weak one, but there's an argument. So you're going to throw it out there. Let's face it. These are bad arguments. They're not persuasive. And if billionaires decide to vacate California, I don't really think that's such a terrible thing. You'd still have the great higher education temples, Caltech, Stanford, Cal, UCLA, USC. I can go right down the line. There's so many great schools in California. And employers are going to want to hire those people. And they're going to want to stay in California, even though it is really expensive. And there's that billionaire's tax. Who knows? I might become a billionaire. It just doesn't, it's just not a strong argument. It may pass the giggle test. It's not a strong argument. When Democrats refuse to embrace true economic justice, by the way, 240-242-5646, please join me with a call. Love to talk to you. Don't forget, click like, click subscribe. I'm going to put up my Facebook GIF as well. Want more? Join Halitics on Facebook all the time. We're there. And also ask you, don't forget, click like, click subscribe. Any interaction with our pages is really, really helpful. Did see you got a new subscriber while I'm doing my show, so I appreciate that. Thank you, whoever you may be. When Democrats don't champion economic justice, they make themselves far more vulnerable on social and cultural issues. They have to be far more careful to thread a needle where they don't want to offend the base that includes identity groups that support them. So they have to be really careful to try not to offend them, to drive them out. But at the same time, they have to steer a middle ground because, many middle class, many working class Americans are skeptical of demands by identity groups. Now, I'm not saying those demands are right, wrong, indifferent, whether I agree with them or not. But if you want working people to be on your side, you have to be careful not to offend them unless they view you as a true ally. Unless they say, yeah, that guy Newsom, hey, he's been out there calling for Medicare for all, and he pushed for legislation that really made my life better in really obvious ways. So maybe I don't agree with him on the trans rights issues, or maybe this or maybe that, but I'm still going to vote for him. The way you cut through all the cultural issues is you champion working people. Because they care more about their families. There may be a lot of animus towards immigrants, xenophobia, and the like. Barack Obama won Iowa. Okay, he won Iowa. He won Iowa because Iowans were hurting. Because W's policies, war with Iraq, had been bad for them, had hurt them. Neoliberalism was not good for the heartland. But Barack Obama did not abandon neoliberalism. He embraced it. He embraced war around the world. And he also embraced free trade, even to a greater degree than Bush had. he did not promote Medicare for all, single payer. So if you're an Iowan, it's like the whitest state, one of the whitest states. You have Democrats embracing all manner of identity politics, but they are not doing anything for you economically. Why would you support them? What do you get out of it? What's in it for me as an Iowan? So of course you're going to be susceptible to arguments about identity, that Democrats care more about people of color, immigrants, trans people than they do about me. And by the way, that dynamic doesn't only hold for Iowa. Kamala had about the weakest showing of any Democrat in a long, long time in New Jersey, a state with much more diversity. In New York City, Harris did not perform particularly well relative to previous Democrats. This is what happens when Democrats don't embrace economic justice. They become very, very vulnerable on cultural issues. Now, people will say, well, that's because, and I saw this in response to my program yesterday, how could Democrats lose to this evil clown Trump? That was the question. And one person wrote, well, bigotry, right? Racism. But that argument, we all have that in us, those isms. We're all going to be angry and upset, resentful if we think people are getting something. Another group has its hand out and they're getting something and we're not. Nobody likes that. The way you address that is you make sure everyone has enough. Democrats have failed utterly at that. Make sure everyone has enough and no one has too much. Democrats have failed utterly at that. I wanted to show this clip because this has been an issue, and not just for Newsom, right? Also, Katie Porter has faced some blowback for her pro-trans stance. And Newsom, on the other hand, faced blowback for being critical to a degree of the trans movement, of trans activists. But this is the problem. The anti-identity politics people, they're never going to be satisfied. They're going to just keep beating you up on an issue until you are utterly and 100% with them. And then they're still going to beat you up. Gavin Newsom is never going to win over the right, the right-wing elitists, because they're always going to be a little suspicious. They're always going to be like, well, yeah, he opposes that wealth tax, but he's not for slashing our taxes to the bone. So you're never going to win them over. You have to simply take pro-worker position, which obviously Gavin Newsom frequently doesn't. Here he is.
The fundamental question that lies at the root of all of this is the question that you're not wanting to answer, which is whether boys can become girls.
Yeah, I think for the grace of God. Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the sympathy. I also feel terrible for anybody who's suffering with any sort of
I think it's
mental or physical
been the
condition.
case
That's
for
terrible, but
generations, for time immemorial. God bless.
So Gavin Newsom in that clip managed to do what is like really hard. He made Ben Shapiro seem sort of sympathetic, right? Where he said, well, I feel bad for these people, trans people. And Shapiro says, well, I do too. But he's so easy to attack, meaning Newsom, because he doesn't even take a position. He did tell, I don't think, was it Charlie Kirk that he told that he didn't think that trans athletes should be competing against girls. Trans girls should compete against girls. I think he said that. He said it isn't fair. Maybe it wasn't Kirk. I don't remember. But in that clip, he couldn't even say that. He wouldn't even say that. Now, I'm not saying he should say that. I think he should say what he truly believes. I don't want politicians to bend with the wind, and when they're read the room. I don't want that. I mean, a little bit, maybe. Of course, you want to be, you're going to talk about the issues that matter to your audience. Of course, that is important. But I don't want them shading positions and changing their statements, right, or reframing issues because that's what they think a particular host or a particular audience wants to hear. I want them to be honest, straightforward, and to be. God, I'm struggling with words. Why is this so? This shouldn't be so hard. I want them to maintain the same position over time. If you change it a little bit, you say, okay, I've reconsidered, but by and large, you're not going to, revisit issues. People can trust you. You're trustworthy. So if Gavin Newsom, I don't know what he really thinks about trans athletes and the whole issue of trans rights. Later on, they talk about whether teachers should be telling parents if they're confided in by a student who says they're trans. And I think that's a really hard question. I don't really have a good answer to that. I think that there should be some kind of privacy. There should be, certainly students should be allowed to talk to counselors with an acceptance and an understanding of confidentiality. I do truly believe that. I know that's not a popular view. But I want Gavin Newsom to say what he believes. Gavin Newsom says, yeah, you know what? We want to make sure trans kids are totally accepted in schools. And we don't want them to feel marginalized in any way. And I believe one way to do that is to allow trans girls to compete in girls' sports. Now, I would disagree with that position. I don't share it. But if that's what he believes, I would have far more respect for him for saying that than for saying whatever he thinks his audience wants to hear. And you know what else? I would still certainly consider voting for Gavin Newsom if I agreed with him on other policies. That wouldn't keep me from voting for Gavin Newsom. The view that, even though I don't share it, that trans girls in high school should be allowed to compete on girls' varsity sports teams, I don't agree with that view. But that wouldn't keep me from voting for you. If you stood for Medicare for all, if you stood for a wealth tax on billionaires, I'd vote for you. So I'm going to vote. I would vote. I can't vote for him because I don't live in California. And by the way, I'm not the only one. There's so many people who would say exactly what I just said. If you're going to make life a little better for me, a little easier for my kids, I'll vote for you. Even if you're not for rounding up immigrants and putting them in a gulag. If you're going to make my life just a little bit better, I'll vote for you. But that's what Gavin Newsom won't do. So that's why, honestly, I would vote for Butch Ware. I don't share his views on identity politics to a significant degree. But you know what? When it comes to economic justice for all Californians, and Butch Ware believes in, he's a big supporter of reparations. I don't think that's the right way to address inequality. I'm not a huge believer in that. I don't care. I'd vote for him because he's for Medicare for all, because he's for taxing the billionaires, because he does believe that everyone deserves to have a decent job, decent income, enough. That's your choice, man. Who else are you going to vote for? Butch Ware, Bill Clinton 2.0 over here, continues to fuel his presidential ambitions by burning California down on his way out. Dems cannot be redeemed. All right. To be fair, Newsom's not on the ballot. So I guess you say, well, he's not on the ballot, so who cares? I'll vote for one of the other. I'll vote for someone who is running, but it ain't going to be Butch Ware. And remember, it's a top two. So you got to vote. You got to vote for Ware in that Dem primary in June. They're all on the ballot together. You could have two Dems, you could have two Republicans. It could be anything. So you better vote for Butch Ware. That's going to be, if he doesn't get into the finals, that's your last chance to vote for somebody decent. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? Because that wealth tax is just so important. It's a way to show you're independent of the billionaires. You stand with the 35 million Californians who aren't billionaires rather than the couple hundred that are. Governor's Field isn't buying the wealth tax. It's interesting. They don't mention Butch Ware in this. Former Rep. Katie Porter, LA Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, Xavier Becerra, Ian Calderon all say they oppose the union's attempt to apply a one-time 5% tax on billionaires' holdings. So you got no choice. You really don't. You gotta vote for Ware. And the argument, well, we'd be giving it to a Republican. No, this is primary. This is a primary. It's insane. It's insane. This is a Democrat Party that's trying to flush itself right down the toilet by complete loyalty, fealty to fear of billionaire elites. All right, I got in what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about this specific issue, which is, again, Democrats' unwillingness to fight for you. Their unwillingness to take on the billionaire elites who are strangling our country. That's where we are right now. Yesterday we talked about Trump, how bad he is. Today we talk about how bad these Democrats are. You got, please, for the love of all that is holy, take seriously alternatives to the Democratic and Republican candidates. California, Butch Ware. Maryland, Andy Ellis. In Seattle, Shama Swan. This is the only way we're going to make things a little bit better. Thank you for being part of Halitics. I will be back tomorrow.